Thank you very much, and thank you for this opportunity to discuss with you some of the findings of International Ideas new report, Global State of Democracy, that was just launched in 15 November. I will give you a brief overview of the global findings, and I believe my colleagues will look at the more in depth what does the index say about Indonesia in the world of democracies. I will speak in English, but then feel free to ask questions in English or Indonesia. So I'm sure my friend will help me in translation.
No problem.
As we all know, there is a lot of recent media reports and even some of the public opinion polls suggesting that democracy is in crisis or democracy worldwide is in decline. And there is certainly reasons to be concerned. I think the world is facing complex challenges, be it from food scarcity to climate change or the terrorism to populism and so on. What we think is testing democracy's resilience. So we wanted to ask the question, is it really so? Is the democracy in decline, as some of the public opinion and media reports seem to suggest? And how we studied it by developing an index which is covering 155 countries around the world, looking at 99 indicators, different types of indicators, over a period of 40 years, from 1975 until 2015. So we're not grant you that we are not covering the last 2 years, over which the world has of course witnessed a lots of different types of backsliding and setbacks, but those do not yet form a trend. So we look at the last 40 years of world democracy. And I just want to emphasize that we didn't want to rank countries. We are not providing in order this country is more democratic than the other. So we are not using scores like Freedom House or the Economist intelligent indexes, but rather we are trying to identify some of the trends at the global level and regional level, and at the country level one can study how your country is doing vis-a-vis different attributes from 0 to 1, 0 being the worst and 1 being the best possible score. No, keep it there, yeah. No, just quickly that this, what you see here, and it is translated, I believe, or at least will be available. These are the types of attributes that we looked at when developing the index. The sub-attributes being a representative, governments, fundamental rights, checks on government, impartial administration, which covers absence of corruption and predictable enforcement, and then participatory engagement. So what is the global state of democracy? What our findings show that there's certainly many challenges, and the resilience of democracy cannot be taken for granted, and there is lot space for improvement in all these 4 attributes worldwide. However, situation is better than perhaps suggested by some of these very pessimistic views about the state of democracy. And the trend since 1975 suggests that democracy has been resilient over time, and there has been constant improvement in almost all of these attributes, all these 4 attributes, minus 1, which I will come in a minute. And moreover, generally the regressions are short-lived, and democracies have been able to bounce back. They have proven to be resilient. They have been able to recover even when there have been events and occurrences of backsliding. And there are actually many more democracies now than there was 40 years ago. If you take 1975, there were as few as 46 countries in the world which could be considered democratic, with competitive elections, which is 30% of the world countries. And that number has grown to 132. So it's 68% of the world countries that can be said to exercise democratic way of governing their countries. And next, yeah. Yeah, so here is just a slide about which shows you these four attributes and the type of improvement globally speaking. What we should note though, that when it comes to the checks on government, there has been a kind of plateau over the last 10 years. Since 2005, 2010, there has not been improvement. There has not been, globally speaking, there's not been improvement, and not much of, we have not seen much setbacks, but we haven't seen improvement either. And that's of course worrying, because in many places in the world, it's in the name of efficiency or national security that executive is increasing its powers against parliament or against the other representative institutions. And that's something that one should keep an eye on in the world. This one is the one where the world has not made progress since 1975. And that's the impartial administration, meaning absence of corruption and predictable enforcement. And that's perhaps the biggest threat, if you like, to the state of democracy, globally speaking, that since 1975, there has not been progress. Democracy has not been able to facilitate getting rid of corruption or enforcement, predictable enforcement of laws related to curbing corruption. So some new means, new ideas, new thoughts would be needed, because in the long run, that's one thing that may probably delegitimize, possibly, democracy in the eyes of people and people's trust on democratic institutions. This is just trying to illustrate that there are indeed some of these threats to democracy, and the modern, what we call modern backsliding that we can identify in many parts of the world. And it's very different from the traditional backsliding. If you like, the traditional backsliding would be the coup d'etat, military taking over, authoritarian regimes making comeback, or election fraud on the election day, and everybody can see, oh, there has been a big election fraud, and hue and cry. It's much more subtle. These backslidings, globally speaking, are much more subtle. They are backsliding. They are using the very legal framework. The aim is not try to abolish the system, but rather perhaps manipulate the system. So there is, it is much more, in a way, it is more sophisticated and more, in a way, more dangerous, as it is using the existing legal framework. Can be about restricting access to some of the public documents, or related to appointment of judges, or any such, or making legal changes in the legislation, extending 10 years of the sitting president, or other institutions that are not willing to give up on power. But what is an interesting finding, though, is that even when these two happen, the backslidings, the other attributes suffer, except the participatory engagement. So it seems like people's trust on democracy, or people's preference of democracy as the most desired system of government, doesn't seem to suffer, even when there are these events of backsliding. This is just to show you some of the trends in the Asia and the Pacific in comparison to the world. The blue line being there, the Asia and the Pacific. And of course, Asia and the Pacific is difficult to put it into. We do have then Southeast Asia, and as I mentioned, you can look at Indonesian situation as well. Asia Pacific, of course, covers a huge area, and diversity is such that it's difficult to capture the trends, even when you have to put countries like Australia and Bangladesh into one index and try to catch the trends. It's easier in case of Europe and other countries. this is that's show you the website where you can go and use these global indices, play with them, look at them, compare as you like, using different attributes, and see how they correlate also with each other. And it's a global public tool that is at anyone's use. So I guess the main message from this study really is that there are threats that we need to be aware of. You should not take democracy for granted, but globally speaking, democracy has been able to improve. If you take the long time frame, over time, democracies have proven to be resilient and able to recover from different regressions and crises. So it is perhaps more optimistic. Our view is more optimistic regarding the future of democracy than some media reports may suggest. Thank you very much, and I'm happy to answer if you have any questions on